Welcome back to another episode of Matthew King's Private Pilot Ground School. So today we're going to be learning how to fly a traffic pattern. So what is a traffic pattern? It is how we operate within the vicinity of an airport. So whenever we take off, whenever we're coming into land, this is how we ensure that we're doing proper procedure and ensuring safety when we're close to an airport. So let's start with a takeoff and entry to a traffic pattern. So first we got to figure out whichever runway we're using. So let's say today the wind is favoring runway 10. So we're going to use runway 10. So a few things to know about a traffic pattern. The standard way to fly a traffic pattern is by flying left turns. So every single turn that we're going to make in the traffic pattern is going to be to the left, unless, however, your VFR sectional chart under the airport information, like near where the airport is, if it says RP, that means it's a right traffic pattern. So that's non-standard. So at Milledgeville, we fly left patterns. And so what we're gonna do is we're gonna take off on runway 10 and we're going to fly straight out. Now we're gonna do this until we are 500 feet below our traffic pattern altitude. So traffic pattern altitude is always going to be, for us, just general aviation planes, it's going to be 1,000 feet AGL. AGL meaning above the ground. So when we are 1,000 feet above the ground, we are traffic pattern altitude. And so when we are, our procedure at Faithful Guardian is we are going to get to 500 feet below that pattern altitude. And then we're gonna make a 90-degree left turn. So that first leg is called our departure leg. And then once we make that first left turn, we're gonna be on the crosswind leg, all right? And so while we're doing this, we're still climbing. We're trying to get up to our pattern altitude. And so let's say the field elevation at Milledgeville is 457 feet. That's our field elevation. So our pattern altitude, we're gonna round up a little bit, is gonna be 1,500 feet, okay? And that's gonna be obviously indicated altitude on our altimeter. And so when we are at 1,500 feet, we're at our pattern altitude. So while we're on crosswind, we're continuing to climb. And so, like we said, all of our turns are gonna be to the left. A traffic pattern wants to be a perfect rectangle once we're done flying it. And so whenever we're at a 45-degree angle to our 1,000 footers, so right about here, it's about a 45-degree angle, we're gonna turn what's called downwind. So right around when we turn downwind, we should be getting close to that 1,500 foot. So once we get to that 1,500 foot, we're gonna level out and maintain that 1,500 feet. And what's happening on downwind is we are just flying directly parallel to the runway. So since we're heading in a direction of 280, our heading indicator should be somewhere between 270 and 290 while we're flying parallel to the runway. We're at our 1,500 feet, and so we're gonna level off, and we're just continuing to fly parallel to the runway, all right? Now, when we're right here, abeam the 1,000 footers on the other side, these 1,000 footers, these giant rectangles, they're gonna be our landing, our aiming point on our landing. And so when we are abeam our 1,000 footers, when we are directly parallel to them, then don't pay attention to that. That's not when we turn. But that's when we are going to begin our descent. So in our Cessna 172, first procedure is carb heat, carburetor heat. And then we are going to bring our RPM to 1,700. All right, so carb heat, RPM 1,700, and then flaps are gonna be at 10 degrees. All right, and then from there, we're gonna be pitching. Remember, we pitch for altitude. We pitch for airspeed, we use our power for altitude. So we pull that power back so that we're gonna start losing some altitude. And then we're gonna pitch for 80 to 85 knots. All right, and we're just continuing to fly parallel to the runway, and now, once again, when we are at roughly a 45-degree angle from our 1,000 footers, we are going to make another left-hand turn and turn base. So you can kind of see where this is going at this point. We're flying a perfect rectangle, and this is our base leg. All right, and now when we turn base, we're going to go ahead and put our flaps at 20 degrees. All right, so we're at flaps 20 degrees, and now we're pitching for roughly 70 knots. Still continuing that descent. And now there's no really perfect time to turn towards the runway. So what we want to do is we want to begin our turn, and at the point where we roll out from our turn and we're wings level, we want to be completely in line with the center line of the runway. So whatever turn is going to get us directly in line with the center line of the runway is what we want to do. And then we're turning what's called final. Final approach, and as we're coming into final approach, we want to pitch for 65 knots. And we're still aiming for our aiming point, those 1,000 footers right down the runway. So that's how you fly a standard traffic pattern. Remember, we depart, turn crosswind, downwind, base, and final. And now, that's just a standard traffic pattern. Now let's say you are, you're just taking off and you're not staying in the traffic pattern. You're going to be departing the traffic pattern. Now, in the same way, we can use our traffic pattern to depart in order to maintain safety in the vicinity of the airport. So let's say that we are taking off on runway 10, and 10 is pointing to 100, which is kind of towards the east. And let's say we actually want to just go straight out and depart to the east. So we can do just that. We can go on our departure leg and continue to go all the way straight out to the east. Now let's say we actually wanted to depart to the west. So unfortunately, we're using a runway that goes to the east. So to get back to the west, what we can do is we can turn crosswind, then we can turn downwind, and while we're on downwind, we can depart to the west. So that's pretty much all for flying the traffic pattern in the vicinity of the airport. Now that we've got kind of the turns down, we know how the traffic pattern works. We're going to talk about how to enter the traffic pattern when you're coming from somewhere else. All right, so let's say we're coming back into the Milledgeville Airport. We took off and we climbed, and we went out to the northeast-ish. So we're up here. We did steep turns, we did slow flight, we did stalls, all the good stuff, and now we're coming back in for a landing at the Milledgeville Airport. And so the standard way to enter a traffic pattern is on the downwind leg, which we know is right here. So if we're right up here, what we're going to want to do is enter the downwind on a 45-degree angle right around midfield, right around halfway down the runway. And so we're going to enter on a 45-degree, and once we're about a mile away from the runway, we are going to begin to fly parallel and just fly our normal traffic pattern and land. Now that's kind of the standard way to enter it. Now let's say we're up in the northwest, just way up here. This is where our airplane's at. And it doesn't really make much sense to go all the way over here, enter a 45 left downwind. So what we can actually do is enter an extended base. So instead of coming way out here, we come just down here and we join the base to turn final for runway 10. So now there's a few different things. We talked about that procedure before. When you're on downwind, you go carb heat, power back 1700, pitch for 80, 85, then you turn base, flaps 20, pitch for 70. So the procedure is a little different. So when we are 3 miles out, we're going to do a few things. We're going to kind of do what we normally do on downwind. We're going to carb heat, power to 17, and then flaps 10. When we are 2 miles out, we're going to go to flaps 20, and then pitch for our traditional 70 knots on base. Now, once we're on kind of established on that base, and it kind of from there, you're just kind of making whatever corrections you need to do. So if you're still a little high, a little low, you kind of make corrections as needed. So that's how you enter. Let's say we're coming from the northwest. Now let's say we took off originally and we went way down to the south. Maybe there's a whole bunch of traffic going on up north. So we went down to the south. So you may be wondering kind of like, man, could I just kind of like slide in and go this way, or like, you know, what's the best thing to do here? So if we were to enter a right base, that'd be going against standard protocol. We don't want to do that. It's kind of unsafe. You might also aggravate some people in the pattern as well, so you don't want to do that. So let me just erase this right here. All right, so what we're going to want to do is enter what's called a teardrop entry. And so what's going to happen, let's say we're down here at the south, what we're going to do is fly directly over midfield, halfway down the runway. And we want to make sure that we are 500 feet above the highest traffic pattern altitude. And so you heard me say before that our pattern altitude is 1,500 feet. And so that's actually not, most of the time, that's not going to be the highest pattern altitude. So jets and turboprop airplanes, they'll fly their traffic patterns a little bit higher because they just descend at a much faster rate. And so let's say that at Milledgeville, the traffic pattern altitude for heavy jets is going to be 1,700 feet. So what we want to do is add 500 feet to that. What do you get? You get 2,200 feet. So we're going to fly over midfield at 2,200 feet, and we're going to fly completely perpendicular to the runway, just like this, for 2 nautical miles. So when we see on our GPS that we're 2 miles away from the Milledgeville Airport, what we're going to do is begin to make a turn. As you can see, it looks kind of like a teardrop. We're going to begin to make a turn no more than 30-degree bank all the way around until we come in at that 45 and join the left downwind for runway 10. So so we went over how you fly the traffic pattern, and also how you enter the traffic pattern, and just kind of the procedure that goes along with it. So just a few things to keep in mind. Traffic patterns at controlled airports and uncontrolled airports operate a good bit differently. When you're at a controlled airport, a lot of times they might tell you when to turn final, or they may tell you when to turn base. Whereas at an uncontrolled airport, you're responsible for making sure you know where all the traffic is at all times. I mean, same thing at a controlled airport. You want to know where all the traffic is, but especially at an uncontrolled field, you must every time that you make a turn, every time you come in to enter, you're making radio calls. So when we take off runway 10, we're saying, hey, Milledgeville Airport, Skyhawk 739 Romeo Lima is departing runway 10, left closed traffic, saying, hey, we're making left traffic right now. Now, when we turn our crosswind, Milledgeville traffic, Skyhawk 739 Romeo Lima is turning left crosswind, runway 10. Milledgeville Baldwin County traffic, Skyhawk 739 Romeo Lima is turning left downwind, runway 10. Milledgeville Baldwin County traffic, Skyhawk 739 Romeo Lima is turning left base 10. Milledgeville traffic, Skyhawk 739 Romeo Lima is turning final for 10. So you're constantly communicating. Make sure you're not only telling everybody in the traffic pattern who you are, where you are, and what you're doing, but making sure we're also listening to who else is speaking. Because if you're just speaking, just like in normal life, if you're just having a conversation with somebody and all you care about is what you have to say and not what they have to say, it's not a very productive conversation. So same thing to keep in mind with traffic patterns. So yeah, that's about it. Hope you learned a lot from this. This is how we fly traffic patterns in the aviation industry. So yeah.